Corned beef, rich, salty, tender, the kind that melts against warm rice or crackles beside a fried egg. You can almost smell it now, that deep, savory aroma rising as the fat turns clear, the edges browning just enough to stick to the pan. It's simple pleasure, the kind you can summon straight from the shelf. Twist, slice, and serve. Dinner solved in seconds. But that familiar comfort has a cost most of us never taste. Behind the shine of those red and gold cans are long supply chains that cross oceans, meats reworked through industrial brine and sodium levels that could outpace an entire day's meal. The labels stay clean, the story inside not so much. So today we're opening those cans with a different purpose, not to eat, but to examine. We'll show you which 5 brands deserve a hard pause, and which 2 still earn their place on your plate. Because once you see what's really sealed inside, you may never hear that metal click the same way again. 1. Libby's corned beef. Libby's sits everywhere. On supermarket shelves and camping packs on the back row of your grandmother's pantry, the red label with the golden crest feels almost woven into American memory. The brand doesn't need to shout. It has been there for generations, promising the same steady comfort that fed soldiers abroad and families at home. However, familiarity can hide what inspection lines quietly record. Most Libby's corned beef sold in the United States is not made here. It comes from plants inspected under Brazil's export code, then relabeled for domestic sale. The recipe looks simple: cooked beef, salt, sugar, sodium nitrite, yet that last ingredient, sodium nitrite, remains the same preservative linked by health agencies to higher risks when processed meats are eaten regularly. Yet beneath the label, there is another story: concentration. In each 56-gram serving sits roughly 530 milligrams of sodium, almost 1/4 of the daily recommended limit. A single small sandwich can quietly push you past 1/3 of your allowance before noon. The fat content doubles the indulgence. None of this is illegal, but the clarity ends there. In regulatory filings, the manufacturer lists product of Brazil in small print, while advertising still trades on the brand's Midwest heritage. For most shoppers, the connection between that nostalgic label and a distant industrial processor is invisible. The can looks domestic, the product globalized. That gap between image and origin is where trust begins to thin. Even so, the product continues to meet minimum USDA import standards, which rely heavily on partner nation documentation. Few consumers realize that the inspection stamp on the can reflects not an American factory visit, but paperwork exchanged across borders. When recalls occur, as they have for other Brazilian meats in recent years, tracing a batch becomes a bureaucratic maze. By contrast, Libby's marketing stays focused on taste and tradition. The company's own copy speaks of slow-cooked flavor and home-style quality. Those words ring familiar, but they no longer describe a process that is slow or local. Modern production favors speed, uniform texture, and chemical consistency. The result is dependable, yes, but also detached from the slow brine cuts that once defined real corned beef. A can opened today is not the same as the one our parents knew. The difference lies less in the flavor than in the formula, less in the kitchen, more in the chemistry. And when an ingredient list reads shorter, but hides stronger concentrations, that brevity feels misleading. Convenience has been perfected, but transparency has not. Libby's endures because it sells a feeling, the illusion of permanence in a world that keeps changing what permanence means. Consumers reach for it out of habit, not hunger for information. The metal key still twists, the seal still breaks with a hiss, and the meat still gleams under fluorescent light. Trust once earned can corrode inside the can. 2. Goya corned beef. In many Latin kitchens, corned beef was never just a meal. It was rhythm, comfort, and pride in a single pan. The aroma rising from sizzling onions and tomatoes mixed with that familiar salt and fat filling the house long before the rice was done. For decades, Goya's bright label became part of that ritual, bold, yellow, and loud, just like the music that used to play beside the stove. It carried a taste of home for families who had crossed oceans, but never left their roots behind. Still, nostalgia can hide what time quietly changes. The Goya of today, stamped and sealed for global shelves, is a different creature from the one remembered. The label reads the same, the color glows the same, but the recipe now leans harder on preservation than heritage. Each 56-gram serving carries about 830 milligrams of sodium, nearly 40% of an adult's recommended daily limit. You can feel that number if you've ever wiped your tongue after a salty bite. That alone turns a cultural symbol into a dietary hazard one many buyers never notice because the can looks so familiar. Over decades of expansion, the company's sourcing stretched across continents. The fine print often reads "Product of Brazil," not Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic, where many of its loyal customers trace their roots. The beef is cooked, pressed, and sealed in plants far from the recipes that first inspired the brand. The flavor that once relied on spice and slow simmering is now manufactured through chemistry, the balance between salt, sugar, and sodium nitrite designed to mimic freshness, not preserve tradition. Beyond the recipe lies a subtler erosion of transparency. Nutritional panels are legally sufficient but emotionally thin. They tell you the numbers, not the story behind them. No mention of how the meat is sourced, how much fat is trimmed, or what grade of beef makes its way into the grinder. The phrases stay vague: cooked beef, seasoned, packed under inspection. These words fulfill regulations while revealing almost nothing. It's food reduced to paperwork. And paperwork rarely smells like home. On closer reading, the problem isn't deception, it's distance. The same company that sells beans steeped in cultural pride and adobo that still tastes like home has allowed its corned beef to drift into corporate anonymity. In trying to be everywhere, it lost where it came from. That's not a crime, it's a consequence of scale. Yet in every bite that tastes a little too salty, you can sense that compromise. In small print, Goya's website calls this product premium. But what premium means here is efficiency-type margins, consistent output, predictable taste. It's the kind of perfection that leaves no room for character. The result is uniform, safe, and strangely empty. Even the texture-dense, almost rubbery, feels engineered to last, not to savor. The tragedy isn't that Goya's corned beef is dangerous. It's that it used to be meaningful. The same label that once connected generations now sits in a global food chain that speaks fluent efficiency, but forgets flavor's language of belonging. Somewhere between the kitchen that danced to salsa and the warehouse that hums with conveyors, something vital got filtered out. What used to smell like heritage now tastes like history preserved too long. The rhythm is still there, but faint mechanical echoing from a can that forgot the song it was meant to keep. 3 Exeter corned beef. A fluorescent light hums above a metal table. A clipboard rests beside stacked cans, each stamped with codes and dates that promise compliance. Somewhere an inspector initiates a form, not tasting, not questioning, only verifying that the paper matches the rule. It all looks precise, efficient, safe. From there, Exeter corned beef begins its quiet journey through the system. The label reads clean and old-fashioned white crest red background, a design that looks unchanged for half a century. It projects familiarity, the kind that builds trust through endurance. But most Exeter cans in American stores are produced under Brazil's export authority, then approved for sale through a process that depends more on documentation than inspection. The plant numbers and batch codes are filed correctly. The paperwork flawless. At inspection level, the details hold on paper. U.S. authorities rely on certification exchanges with exporting countries. Physical checks are occasional, sometimes only during recall periods. For consumers, that means the confidence stamped on the label often represents a signature rather than a test. Each can that crosses the port does so because a document says it cannot because someone sliced it open to see what's inside. Even regulators admit the limitation. Import compliance is largely procedural, built to process volume, not doubt. In public records, Exeter shows no active safety violations, no formal recalls, which sounds reassuring. Yet that absence can mean only one of two things: consistency or invisibility. When oversight is shaped by repetition, problems blend into routine. And routine, once perfected, becomes the most efficient form of neglect. After processing, the product itself tells a quieter story. The ingredient list is the same as others: cooked beef, salt, sugar, sodium nitrite. Nothing alarming, nothing extraordinary. But the sodium load, roughly 550 milligrams per 56-gram serving, stays near the industry's upper limit. That number is legal but cumulative. A single serving at lunch, another at dinner, and you're already past half of what health agencies advise for a full day. Regulations monitor what's inside the can, rarely how often it's eaten. Hence, the illusion of safety endures. The label carries a small import stamp, the crest still polished, the letters bold. You trust the code because it looks official, not because it speaks truth. The product's steadiness, its decades of sameness, are built on the quiet success of bureaucracy, where risk is managed, not removed. For many buyers, Exeter represents old value, dependable, affordable, the same as it ever was. And in one sense, that's true. The taste hasn't changed much, a dense loaf of cured meat, salty, slightly metallic, firm enough to slice, but never crumbly. It's food designed to survive time. But endurance can hide decay. Each can, perfectly legal, perfectly documented, is also perfectly detached from the person who eats it. You don't see the warehouse or the forms or the light flickering above that metal table. You only see the crest, proud, spotless, printed. And that's the quiet genius of the system. When everything looks correct, you stop asking what correctness means. The numbers match, but the flavor tells another truth. 4 Hereford corned beef. Hereford looks honest. The bull stands proud against the red and blue label, steady and unpretentious, a symbol of strength and tradition. Among canned meats, it feels like the dependable one, a brand that doesn't need flashy promises or nostalgia. Just clean design, bold lettering, and a quiet confidence that says, us, we've been here forever. Granted, Hereford's history does earn that image. For decades, it has filled shelves in corner stores, army bases, and emergency pantries. Many buyers see it as the reliable middle ground, not too cheap, not too fancy, just right. Yet beneath that claim of consistency lies a truth measured in milligrams, not memories. One 56-gram serving of Hereford's regular corned beef contains about 550 milligrams of sodium, nearly 1/4 of what health agencies recommend for an entire day. Eat a full can, and you've quietly consumed close to the entire limit. For decades, this balance between taste and salt has been the brand's comfort zone. Salt keeps the flavor alive, the texture firm, and the shelf lifelong. Its preservation turned into identity. But salt also disguises what's missing: subtlety, freshness, the depth that real, slow-cooked corned beef once had. When sodium becomes the anchor of flavor, every bite pulls closer to the line between safe and excessive. Beneath that claim of premium quality, the ingredient list remains bare and predictable: cooked beef, salt, sugar, sodium, nitrite. No wrongdoing, nothing hidden yet, nothing elevated either. The product sits squarely in the industrial standard built for mass reliability. The sodium nitrite stabilizes the color, the sugar smooths the harshness, the fat fills the texture. It's food designed not to fail, but not quite to impress. In actual tests, Hereford's sodium levels often hover near the same mark as its cheaper competitors. That alone challenges its perceived hierarchy. For all its poise and packaging, its nutritional data tells the same story: safety through sameness. And sameness, when repeated across brands and decades, becomes a quiet national habit, the normalization of excess. Consumers don't question what looks balanced, because the numbers are printed too small to startle. Still, there's no deception here, just inertia. A system that rewards familiarity keeps familiar recipes intact. As long as the label reads fully cooked beef, few pause to ask how much salt is required to keep that promise viable across oceans, seasons, and warehouses. The can survives every environment because chemistry has already accounted for it. It's a miracle of stability and a slow erosion of flavor. Therefore, Hereford stands as the perfect case of partial truth. Everything on the label is correct, yet the impression it leaves feels incomplete. Trust built on design, not on data. It's not a villain, just a mirror of our own comfort with moderation that isn't moderate at all. You might not taste the imbalance at first. It's quiet, familiar, easy to love. But that's the nature of salt: it persuades before it punishes. And Hereford has mastered that persuasion so thoroughly that it feels almost kind. Still behind that calm label and measured tone lies the loudest ingredient of all certainty. The certainty that no one will question a can that looks this honest. Sometimes the calmest label hides the loudest risk. 5 Oxen Palm corned beef. In 2021, dozens of Oxen Palm cans were pulled from American shelves. The recall didn't make national headlines, but inside the small print reports, one phrase stood out: imported without reinspection. It wasn't the recipe that failed. It was the system built to watch over it. Back then, the brand had a solid reputation in Pacific markets. Oxen Palm came from Papua New Guinea and Australia, known for its brighter flavor and less greasy texture. Many customers in the US praised it for tasting closer to homemade. Yet the very lot that drew praise had slipped through the country's regulatory safety net. A simple paperwork misstep, no reinspection under USDA rules triggered the recall. No one was reported ill. But the event exposed how fragile the safety chain truly is. As notices spread, the contrast became hard to ignore. The recall wasn't caused by contamination, but by process failure, an imported shipment that didn't pass through the last layer of American verification. Consumers read "Product of Australia" and assumed oversight. What they received was trust, deferred to another nation's paperwork. The cans looked clean, the seals unbroken, the expiration dates valid. Yet on paper, the system that approved them never actually looked inside. In later reports, regulators described the problem as non-compliance with import reinspection requirements. The words sound harmless, bureaucratic, almost bloodless. But behind them lies a chain reaction. If one container passes unchecked, dozens more can follow. The margin between order and error isn't measured in contamination, it's measured in confidence. Once that cracks, the entire category shakes. Beyond headlines, the brand continued to sell abroad and later returned to US markets, meeting full compliance again. The incident faded into search results and regulatory archives replaced by fresher stories. Yet for those who track these patterns, Ox and Palm became a quiet case study, how a trusted name can cross borders faster than the oversight meant to protect it. Meanwhile, the nutrition panel reads almost ordinary, around 300 milligrams of sodium per 56 grams, serving moderate compared to others. The ingredients stay minimal: cooked beef, water, salt, sodium nitrite. On taste alone, it fares well. But that perhaps is the danger when flavor gives comfort, documentation becomes invisible. Safety feels certain because the product feels good. Beyond headlines and hashtags, oversight failure rarely arrives with drama. It creeps in through missing stamps, unchecked boxes, and procedures assumed not verified. No mold, no odor, no alarm, just a quiet space where responsibility falls between agencies. The food looks fine, and maybe it is, but the process that guarantees it has already thinned. Ultimately, Ox and Palm's story isn't about one recall. It's about how fragile compliance becomes when repetition replaces review. Every system learns efficiency until it forgets why it was built. The same cans that nourished households across the Pacific entered another market, another bureaucracy, another blind spot, and no one noticed until the forms came back unsigned. There's a line between trust and habit, and it often lives on the back of a label most people never read. Ox and Palm didn't break the rules. It simply revealed how easy it is for the rules to bend. Safety isn't lost in flavor, it's lost in paperwork. But the story doesn't end in failure. Beyond the brands we've set aside, there's another aisle, quieter, cleaner, and worth walking toward. Here the labels don't hide behind color or nostalgia. They tell you where the beef came from, how much salt it holds, and why it matters. These are the cans made with restraint, not shortcuts, proof that honesty can still be packaged. We'll take you there next to the brands that earn their trust the hard way, where preservation meets integrity, and where every turn of the key still feels like something worth opening. 6 Grace Reduced Sodium Corned Beef. Morning light fills the kitchen, thin, clear, and quiet. The air carries no heavy scent this time, only the faint hum of a stove warming a clean pan. You open a can and there's no rush of brine, no sharp metallic tang. The sound is softer, the surface smoother, almost careful in its simplicity. This isn't the same story we've heard so far. In contrast, Grace approaches corned beef with restraint, not reinvention. The recipe still follows tradition: cooked beef, salt, sugar, sodium nitrite. But here, the sodium has been trimmed back with intent. Each 56-gram serving contains about 350 milligrams of sodium, nearly a third less than most standard versions. On paper, that number may seem small. Yet inside an industry that measures progress in fractions, it represents a quiet correction, proof that better can begin with less. Under clear labeling, Grace also does something subtle but meaningful. It tells you what it is, not what it wishes to be. Reduced sodium is printed plainly on the can without a halo of slogans or a pastoral illustration of farms. It's a statement, not a disguise. The label feels human, not designed to impress, but to inform. Even the company's official product listings cite the same nutritional data found on its packaging. That alignment alone earns trust in a market where words often wander faster than facts. In moderation, the taste still satisfies. The beef remains firm, slightly oily, but not greasy, the salt noticeable, but not harsh. There's space for flavor to breathe. When warmed, it releases a gentle aroma, less punch, more patience. You can eat it without the afterthought of thirst that follows most corned beef. And while the sodium reduction doesn't make it healthy, it makes it conscious. It feels like a recipe that has stopped shouting. On balance, Grace isn't chasing perfection, it's pursuing proportion. The ingredients remain industrial, the preservatives still necessary, but the brand has chosen to dial back instead of double down. That decision, small in scale, large in meaning, shows what happens when a manufacturer listens to feedback rather than tradition. It's not radical, it's reasonable. And sometimes that's the kind of change that lasts. After all, progress in food safety doesn't arrive through slogans or single breakthroughs. It comes from consistency, a label that says less but means more, a formula that moves slightly toward balance instead of racing toward excess. Grace's reduced sodium version isn't a miracle. It's a marker, one that tells consumers they can ask for better and actually find it. You can taste that difference most in what isn't there: the bite of oversalt, the metallic echo of brine, the fatigue that follows too much of a good thing. What remains is simple: the quiet honesty of meat seasoning and intention. It's proof that restraint can still taste good and that convenience doesn't have to come with a compromise. Cleaner doesn't mean perfect, but it proves the process can change. And in a world that has learned to accept excess as normal, that might be the most flavorful reform of all. 7 Hereford 25% less sodium corned beef. How much difference can one line on a label make in the world of canned meat? Maybe more than we think. After decades of salt-heavy recipes and identical nutrition panels, Hereford's reduced sodium version stands out not with a new flavor, but with a quiet admission that less can in fact be enough. The change isn't dramatic, yet it signals something rare in processed food awareness. For many, this version isn't a reinvention, it's a recalibration. The ingredients remain familiar: cooked beef, salt, sugar, sodium nitrite, but the math has shifted. Each 56-gram serving now contains roughly 360 milligrams of sodium, about 25% less than the regular formula. It's a small numerical adjustment that adds up across habits: less strain on the body, less thirst after breakfast, less noise and flavor. That difference might not read as marketing triumph, but in nutrition, fractions matter. In real kitchens, these margins are where progress hides. Corned beef lives on shelves for the days when meals need to be fast-filling and certain. A version that trims excess without changing identity feels like a compromise designed by someone who understands the rhythm of real life. You can still fry it beside eggs or fold it into hash. It still carries that nostalgic salt and richness, just tuned to a quieter key. Nevertheless, less sodium doesn't mean pure or chemical-free. The nitrite remains for preservation. The fat content still lands in the expected range. This is not health food, it's food that behaves more responsibly. And that distinction matters. Improvement doesn't have to mean erasure. Sometimes progress looks like a smaller number on a familiar label, a signal that someone in the process decided to try harder, even if just a little. Beyond the label, Hereford's approach feels refreshingly honest. There's no rebranding campaign, no pastoral image of fields and cattle. Just an update: factual, traceable, verifiable. The reduction is printed, not proclaimed. In a marketplace that rewards exaggeration, that restraint becomes its own statement. The company didn't reinvent its image. It simply refined its recipe and trusted the consumer to notice. That kind of confidence, quiet and unadvertised, is what transparency should look like. On taste, the adjustment barely registers, and that's the success. The meat browns as it should hold shape on a fork, tastes steady instead of sharp. The difference isn't what's added, but what's absent: the fatigue of too much salt, the sting that lingers after the bite. You realize the can still delivers comfort, only now it finishes clean. In the end, this reduced sodium Hereford isn't a promising transformation. It's offering proof that incremental changes still matter, and that mass market brands can shift without losing themselves. It's an evolution that respects both consumer trust and the limits of tradition. What began as one small line on a label ends up feeling like a quiet gesture toward accountability, understated, deliberate, lasting. A reminder that better doesn't have to be new. Sometimes it just has to be less. In the end, corned beef isn't the villain, it's a reflection. A reflection of how we eat, how we value time, and how easily convenience becomes culture. Inside every can is more than meat and salt. It's a record of habit of shortcuts taken, of corners turned, of lessons still unfolding. What defines a brand isn't the color of its label, but the choices that built it, how ingredients are sourced, how safety is verified, and whether the truth is printed clearly or quietly tucked away. We've seen both sides of that choice, the brands that stayed still and the ones that learned to move some out of conscience, others out of competition. Yet all prove one thing: progress doesn't arrive with headlines. It begins in the small recalculations, a lower sodium count, a clearer label, a bit more honesty in an industry that rarely pauses. No product is flawless, and none needs to be. What matters is awareness, the willingness to look closer, to ask before trusting. Because the moment you open a can, you're not just opening lunch. You're opening the story of how food learns to balance safety, taste, and truth.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.